Over the past few months, we've been working hard to clean up the city, expanding public transport, tackling traffic hotspots, and investing in major infrastructure. One of the biggest moves? Designing a brand new cargo hub on the city's edge and finally closing down the aging port near the downtown. Now, as councillors and investors debate what to do with that newly vacated land, a massive slab of concrete sits quietly gathering dust. The future of the city's shoreline and the disused rail line that runs through it has the public divided. Some want it all cleared out, a fresh start with modern development and walkable trails. Others see potential in the existing infrastructure, calling to preserve the rail line and upgrade it for future metro service. But while City Hall argues over the long-term plans, we've got an opportunity to bring some life back to this space, even if it is just temporary. In this episode, we'll transform the old port into a hub for sports, street food and seaside strolls. We'll give the beach some love, add a little bit of greenery and swap industry for community, dog parks, playgrounds, beer gardens and all. This is how we start building history into the city, one step at a time. Welcome to Sunny Isle. We'll start today's build by removing the cargo harbour and deleting the shipping routes since we no longer serve this area by boat. Let's go ahead and remove all the trees as well. Next, I'm going to grab the static ploppable version of the cargo harbour and put it in its place. And let's make sure that we're working on nice flat ground using the level terrain tool. We can then use the building upgrade version of the cranes to replace the large mesh and customize the surface to our liking, and we'll put this approximately in the same place that we had these before. And I think that's the approximate position we had it before, and I think an iconic place to see these was in this park down here, and if we can still see them, I think we've done a pretty good job at placing them. Yeah, doesn't that look iconic? And as you come through this park, just seeing that on the horizon I think is absolutely beautiful, and it tells the history of the city. Okay, so as I said, I don't want to create a permanent build here. I want this to look and feel temporary, almost like the cargo company or the city that owns the land aren't entirely sure what they want to do with it yet. So we're going to be using a lot of concrete and a lot of temporary looking businesses, and we also need to bring in that rail line. We could make it semi-functional, so we've got the train yard over here, and if we open this up, we do have a couple of upgrades. So we grab this one that is the one without the electrified overhead wires. We can just snap that into the old rail here, and technically speaking, we should, if there's enough capacity on the network, see trains parked up here. I might scooch it along just a little bit further in case we get those extra long trains. This will make this rail line functional, just not as busy as what it once was. It will just be used maybe once a day or once every few days whenever there needs to be a little bit more storage capacity at the main warehouse. Okay, so I added 2 because I'm a little bit greedy. So once again, I'm going to add the static ploppable version of the cargo harbour and use this as a guide for tracing some of the decals, as I want this to be a close replica of the existing asset. And then using some of these custom net lanes, we can trace over some of these elements such as the tracks and the yellow lines. using the decal we found from the Quays and Piers patch, which will come with the Bridges and Ports DLC, we can put down these ship container decals. We can then once again delete the static object, and then we get left with an easy to use layout and surface, and we'll place down a simple concrete texture as a placeholder. Okay, so I did continue around the bay and started developing a much larger harbour area, and I'd like to imagine a lot of this probably existed at the same time that the cargo harbour was open. So we are going to bring in a little bit more of that gritty industrial vibe, especially along the bottom section here. And if we take a closer look at what I've done with the old harbour, I've tried to replicate the decals of the original asset. And as I said, I've done this because I wanted to be able to place buildings without having to deal with uneven terrain or having to fight with the mesh. And this isn't the final rendition. We've got lots of net lanes that aren't necessarily in the right place. I do want to replace this concrete surface because it is very bland. It barely has any texture, but we'll work around the assets that we place down here. Now, to bring pedestrians here, I'm also considering another big project in the same episode, and that is either bringing pedestrians through this road here. So we've got a partly pedestrianized area around the market. So we could either continue that pedestrianization up here, but to be honest, I'm not seeing that much pedestrian activity, so it might be a little bit overkill. Okay, I think plan B instead, we'll start to draw visitors along the harbour arm instead, and we do have a little footpath that crosses over the rail tracks, which is very, very popular. And this is only for local trains, so we don't have the high-speed train coming through here. We don't even necessarily need the overhead wires, so we could remove those. And then we can start to develop a nice pedestrian accessible area along this waterfront. And I wasn't sure about keeping this little beach, but I think we will keep it. It might not be the most desirable because it will be littered with boats and ferry fuel. So we'll try our best to make it nice, but the main beach in this city will be over here, and I've yet to really detail that up, and that's for a future episode. So yeah, we'll bring the pedestrians along here. We've got a very quiet avenue road that only has one lane of traffic in each direction with a tram, and that can lead us all the way down to our new recreational area at the port. Let's start by putting together a road network where we can start to place some assets. We'll mostly be using pedestrian roads near the coast where we'll have the majority of pedestrians, and we'll connect this up right into the avenue next to the indoor fish market. The first asset we're going to place down is the Sports Hub Pavilion. This is a destination for outdoor sports and entertainment where it broadcasts live sports on a giant screen. Let's clean this up by removing any of these sub-elements like the foliage and things that just look out of place. I really like the architecture of this building. I think it really suits the industrial theme that we've got going here with the shipping container like shopping stalls and food stands. Let's go ahead and clean up these textures. And for the rest of these surfaces, let's go for something a little bit different, bringing in those beautiful concrete textures from Generic Lemon and these bright blue colours from El Gendo's colour set. Alright, let's take a look at what we've put together then. And this is just an initial draft of what we can do on this corner. So plop down this asset which came from the Parks and Leisure Content Creator Pack. This looks like, to me, a temporary structure. even this larger piece at the end here where we've got these halls, you can imagine these are set up to be more of a long-term temporary solution. We did have to heavily edit the asset itself, but not too much, mostly just replacing any surfaces and removing any props that wouldn't suit the asset or the area, such as bushes, hedges, grass. And in fact, I've replaced some of the grass with these wooden boards. Looks like reclaimed wood, looks really nice. And then we've got this kind of bright blue texture coming through here. You can imagine these are maybe large rubber carpets, which would be quite easily laid down and removed when needed. And then we've got this fantastic surface, which is by Generic Lemon. This is the pavement surface, and it has that aesthetic that the original cargo harbour had with the squared concrete tiles. And this is just great. This is exactly what I was hoping for. And to get people into the area, I've added a new pedestrian walkway through here. And then we're having that run along the length of the cargo harbour. So we can start to place more assets next to each other. And then along this front here, I want to create a more park area with seating, places to hang out, shady spots, and just admire these mega structures and just watch the boats and watch the horizon, the sunset. Yeah, it looks really, really interesting, I think. Okay, let's recolor this to something more similar to that lovely blue texture. Pushing the roads back into the original asset, let's try to make use of some of these existing lanes that were a part of the cargo port originally. The next asset we're going to place down is the water park. And we'll run a road in front of this to make sure that people have access. And another asset I'd like to include is the basketball pavilion. However, I'm not keen on the orientation of this asset. I want people in the pool to be able to see the bay, so let's turn this around and bring it a little bit closer to the shoreline. I used a pack from StarQ's service blocks and started to place a few of the sub-elements along the front here, including these cute little seating areas which have this ugly statue. So let's replace that with a little planter and a palm tree. For the tennis court, I'm going to enclose this in a fence to prevent the ball from falling into the water. And beside that, we have a little gym area which we can add some details such as fences, a seating area, and somewhere to get changed and go to toilet. As you know, Sunny Isle has a warm climate, so I try to include pergolas and vegetation where possible. This is a large concrete area, so it isn't always ideal. I imagine this place will be very popular to come in the evening when it's a little bit colder. I really look forward to the day, either through the base game or modding, where we'll be able to see some of the people living in the city using some of these props. I think that would add so much life to this game. Let's add our signature blue mat and also remove some of these net lanes that would be covered up. I think that looks pretty good. It makes use of some of this open empty space and we can start to see our vision for this area come into life. To help stitch this area together, I'm going to continue using this concrete texture. I think it really brings everything all together as one. I'm also going to experiment a little bit with some of these invisible hang around areas. Supposedly there's a trick to them to get them to work, like intersecting an existing path. So let's take a look to see if anybody fancies going for a walk. Over by the sports pavilion, I'm going to expand on some of the details in the area, adding these lovely little picnic tables on this open deck, as well as place a random spattering of benches along the harbour front. Using the magic of Move It, I'm going to lower these decals into the ground so they're not so bright and prominent. And throughout the whole area, I'm trying to harmonize the colors, the props, the textures, make this area feel like one cohesive experience. Behind the water park, we're going to place a car park. This is where the industrial area starts to creep in. This is hidden mostly from the pedestrian area, fortunately. Let's not forget to add somewhere where people can call on nature. This spot seemed as good as any, just slightly out the way but not too far away from the public area. And let's make these a nice bright orange colour. At the front of the pavilion, I want to create a little food market, beer garden, and make sure we add some shade for people to shelter from the sunshine. And beside that, we can have a little bit of a back of house area where some of the unused benches and supplies can be kept. Using the transform tools, we can rotate and move the benches into the best place, make it look a little bit more unique and organic. And for special events where we need to restrict access, we can create a queuing area using the grid tool and these lovely bright orange barriers. And we're going to use the same colors that we use for the shipping crates at our freight terminal, make this seem a part of the city. Okay, let's just take a quick break from that detailing speed build and have a quick look at what we've put together so far. And it's quite good. We're already starting to see a few people coming down here. I don't expect there to be that much traffic at 4 AM in the morning. And typically we don't really see that many people using parks anyway. And I've just noticed that that cars just drove through our little barrier here. So I'm just going to use Move It to move that out of the way. So we're using many of the same coloured shipping containers that would have been at the port itself. So these are the same kind of shipping containers that we're using at the new cargo train terminal that we worked on in the last episode. And we're bringing that colour palette through. So we've got this little kind of street food bar area, which I imagine will be quite popular, especially with a view of the bay. And that's kind of a little bit of an overflow area to the main sports pavilion, but not everybody wants to attend a sports event, are more than likely just going to want to chill out here. And if you don't want to spend that much money, there's a little cafe section here where you can probably just grab a coffee. It's not ticketed or anything like that. Or simply just grab something from the local grocery shop and just pack yourself up at one of these picnic tables. Anyway, I think this has come together really, really nicely, especially once we've got that new texture down. And it looks like where I've placed down these hang around areas, people are using them. They're just walking all over. Although I do think I need to adjust the elevation on the corners, because you will find that people will walk through them. But people have freedom to kind of walk wherever they want. Again, we've got a lot of people coming up and down this path, which is super exciting. Little storage area here where some of the staff can pack up. Got all these gas canisters from all the drinks, and maybe some cask beer ale, some spare benches and cones and bits and bobs. And as we move through here, we've got a little toilet situation going on. If you are coming over to this events area and you need to go to toilet, you've got somewhere to go. I imagine this building probably has facilities built in, and this is more for public use. And then over here, if we have a look over this giant crane, we've got this outdoor pool, this little paddling pool, and these little shipping containers, which I thought you couldn't recolor. I thought these were pretty much locked in, and this is the original color down here. I've missed one, but yeah, you can go in and color individual crates and even the slides themselves to make it all match up with your chosen color palette, and it just fits in super nice. This is great. And then out the front, we've got this kind of more open public sports area. This is an area I imagine is free to use, although there is going to be a park attendant making sure it's all being used correctly. Again, it's super early in the morning, so we're not going to see anybody using these, but I have seen people come in and using the gym equipment every now and then. And these are a part of StarQ service blocks. So this is an extension, an upgrade to the park block, and they work pretty well, to be honest. They don't come with all these props, so I have added the fences, some of the seating, but for the most part, you get what you see. And then again, just plopping down some of these little mini park things that we got a few patches ago. So we should see people using the seats, because I've not edited those. So we've just got a small little park to draw people in, entice them. We've got one person sat down having a cup of tea, watching the ferries come and go, have a short break and then walk back. And then back here we've got this beautiful looking basketball arena. So we've got these two basketball courts, and again, this I feel looks like a temporary structure. So in the future, I can fully imagine this all being changed and removed once this city knows what they want to build here. And then at the back here, this is where I want to create more of a staging area. So we do get trains parking here when they're not in use. So we'll keep it mostly industrial, probably just an area for storage, industrial storage, or maybe just keep it fairly empty. You know, there's a lot of space here, and it can feel a little bit daunting trying to fill it up with stuff. But in reality, a lot of these places are just fenced off. It's these portions that you don't see that are just left to get a little bit dusty in the back. And all the way through here, I've got all these cones as well. So it's a little bit of a driving school experience trying to find your spot. But we don't really have that much road paint or anything around here, so we really do need to be careful directing people where they can go and where they can't go. But yeah, really happy with the result of that. So let's start putting together this back area, and then we can then concentrate on installing that new pedestrian walkway that takes you all the way up to the harbour arm. All right, so we've pretty much finished the whole harbour area, and yes, I know I've gone into way too much detail than I should have, especially since I said this is going to be temporary, but if you know me, temporary in Sunny Isle could be a very long time, so let's at least make it look good while the rest of the city grows up around it, and then we can come back to this. And fortunately, using the tree brush tool, it's fairly easy to delete all these props in one fell swoop. But yeah, I've finished the top section here with the rail line, the little industrial area. We've got some open storage for some heavy materials here. Not the most desirable place next to the basketball court, so we have to have a little bit of protection. We've got this wall here, but I think maybe they're stacking it a little bit higher than what they should. And then the rest of this hardcore material is pretty heavy stuff, so I can't imagine the dust kicking off will be too bad. And I wanted to put that in here along with, I've got one of these service blocks here, the Star Q industrial props, and make this practical, make it useful, so that even though it looks nice, we are actually still creating some jobs. So we've got 10 employees there. And then over here, we've got, I think this is just a generic business. Yeah. And then we've got a little entrance at the front here so that vehicles can enter it. And as I said, this is just parking for the train yard. So it's only going to be used when the trains need somewhere to get maintenance, and I'm not entirely sure how that mechanic works, whether they pick a destination based on distance or if it's just randomized. I've not seen many trains come through. I've seen one, so I know that it works. And we've come through here and added lots and lots of details, and you may have saw that I've used lots of different types of surfaces through here. I want to imagine that some of these areas were replaced or kind of found alternative use over time, so you kind of get that patchwork of concrete and asphalt. And yeah, I think it looks really nice. I do, like I said, I do really love these textures from Generic Lemon's road pack. Absolutely stunning work. And then I don't know if you spotted this or if I mentioned it in the speed build, but we've got these little generators, which I imagine you'd have the lights on. I could go one step further and add little solar panels. That's quite a common thing that you see at roadworks when they need to have mobile lighting units. But again, not too much detail. A couple of decals here and there. You know how I like to keep it fairly light on the decals, but it's lovely seeing the car park filling up. It's early in the morning, so we should see more and more people coming through here. And then at the top end, I imagine maybe some people could use this as storage or self-storage, or maybe the cargo harbour just had loads of unclaimed containers and this is just where they've been storing them temporarily until they get collected. So I don't mind coming back through here in the future and removing that. And I've just noticed we got this truck coming right through that fence, and I don't enjoy that, so we'll just drag that back a little bit, and that works for me. And yeah, these are proper industry buildings, so we'll see them being used, and a little bit of domes parking at the back. And I think it just looks stunning, and just the contrast between these leisure areas and the industry in the background, it may seem a little bit odd, but this is how these areas slowly become gentrified over time. And I love the fact that the closer you get to the city, the more detail there is, the more activity there is, the more people. It's great. I absolutely love it. Okay, as I said, the only thing that we really need to finish up now is how to draw people in, and I do want to rework this Avenue Road here. We've got the tram tracks going along here. There's a tram stop just outside the dairy house, so it's got pretty good access to public transport. There's probably another stop somewhere along here, maybe not until you get to Chinatown, which I think is looking really nice now that all the buildings have leveled up. And yeah, no, the city is looking really, really nice. And then at the front here, this is where we got a couple of these industrial props, or not props, buildings. And I've always imagined this to be a local brewery or distillery. So I'm not sure whether we could replace these with something else. I do know that in the signature buildings pack, we do have a brewery. I'm not sure how big it is. Okay, yeah, it's a lot bigger than I expected. It would look really nice there, though. It would fit. So perhaps we could put that in there and sacrifice a couple of these residential buildings, since they are quite repetitive through here. And we can add a little bit more variety to the skyline. So I think it will be worth putting that in there. So when we're doing up this beach area and this road, we'll also have a look at placing that too. Okay, so we've got the brewery in now, and I know I said this was an industrial asset, but it's actually a commercial asset, and it sells beverages. So I'd like to imagine this has become a heritage location where there was once a factory, and you can still see this is a working location. You've got these brewery pieces of equipment at the front of the property, and overall it looks like you could still do some production in there, but it's also a tourist destination, which is great having it in such a central part of the city. You got a nice little area at the back here to have a seat, have a drink. The views aren't great because it does overlook onto this car park, but I'm sure it's a great shady spot on a sunny day. So beautiful location, and this whole area has become weirdly complex with all these tram lines, but I kind of love it. You've got the trams coming down from the harbour, the ferry terminal, and then they go along the front here, and then you've got another line that heads up to the train station up there. So inadvertently it's created this oddly shaped roundabout area, but I'm kind of digging it. And we've even restricted some of the traffic, so most of the vehicle traffic are using the little lane that runs alongside the front of the brewery, leaving any trams and buses space to stop, space to breathe on this lower road. But yeah, fantastic asset, and seeing all the activity around here is just lovely. But you got people walking up there to create this little plaza area. It's almost a perfect fit. It really is. And these buildings have managed to retain their position. I would love it if these were maybe like a similar color. I wonder if we can use the paintbrush tool and just repaint that. Not a fan of the black though. I wonder if we can bump that up to white. Yeah, something like that. That looks really nice. It fits the Sunny Isle vibe with the little terracotta roofs. Okay, so let's continue down here, and we can remove this car park. I don't think that is an attractive asset to have on the beach. And then we'll remove this beach and we'll replace it with our own. And we'll make this sidewalk a little bit wider along here, heading towards the new tourist area, and then just make this area feel a little bit nicer. As I said, I don't want to make this a big feature beach. This is just more of one of the smaller beach locations, and since the ships are coming in, I imagine there'll be a lot of waves, pollution and noise, so maybe we can designate this as the dog-friendly beach. We'll start the area by clearing out any unwanted trees, and the first part of the project I'd like to tackle is this little fisherman's wharf that we're going to place alongside our fish market. I'll be using the Lobster Shack, which came with the Leisure Venues asset pack, and we'll also create a little bit of an outdoor eating area as well as somewhere to park your boat. If you've got a keen eye, you might notice this is very similar to a build I showed in the city showcase I shared recently. And I was so inspired I wanted to create something similar in my own city. I'll be using some of Jay's custom assets, which you can download from Sully's Discord server. But first we need to remove all the terrain that is blobbing around the asset. So I'm using a custom road builder road, which has no driving lanes to push the terrain under the building, which I think works fairly well, to be honest. What a beautiful outdoor eating area. I would love to visit this. It will have great views of the bay. I also wanted to pay a little bit of attention to the fish market. There was this empty space at the side of the building, which I think is a great opportunity to put some of these crates. Using the new palette feature of the Recolor mod, we can create some really nice looking assets at the back here. Starting the beach, I want to create an edge at which the sand will reach, and I find it easier to draw that with a net lane, creating a nice clean curve along the shoreline. I'm using Sully's golden sand surfaces, which are available on the PDX mod store. And at the end of the beach, next to our little fisherman's wharf, I want to create a little bit of a boat ramp. It was at this point I noticed that the footage I'd taken over the course of the last few days had been corrupted, and while I've tried my best to edit out most of the glitchiness, I spent some time redoing my graphic settings both for the game and my recording software. And so here's some test footage of checking out Tygon's high-speed train. And while it might not be super noticeable, I hope that the rest of the video doesn't seem too different from what we recorded earlier. So let's jump back into our beach build where we start to work on this fantastic, beautiful dog park. While I did use these walls originally as a guide to draw the beach, I think it'd be quite nice to include them and build them into planters. Previously, people have commented how it's nice to have the woodland running along the beach, and I think this will be a nice way to retain that while also urbanizing the area. For the pedestrian walkway, we're going to create something slightly fancy using these net lanes from the PDX mod store. These are simply just drawn over the existing pedestrian paths, but they do look really nice and they do draw the eye down the street. Now, I don't think this is necessary, but I did want to add a little bit of a curb around the edge, and I think it does add a lot to the way that it sits into the environment. And then for the rest of this, I simply just want to use a simple concrete surface and start to bring in some of the foliage and trees. I'm also trying out these park areas again, because again, I've been told if you connect up an invisible path, they should work. So time will tell whether we can actually see people using it. To actually get some people onto the beach, I am going to create a little bit of a lookout pier, and then along the front here, put some of these pergolas, street furniture, seats, bins, things that you'd expect along a little beachfront like this. And with the beach in place, let's take a look at what we've worked on and enjoy the view. Okay, so we've got the beach in now, we've got the beach gardens, and as I said, this was always going to be designated more of a local area, since it's not the most desirable view of the large ferry ships coming in and what will be a new port area over in the distance. But it does give somewhere for people to take their dogs. So we've got this massive dog park at the back here, which is the dog activity park. Lovely stuff. And then that is wrapped with this pedestrian walkway that goes all the way along the front here. And that's to encourage people to move along the edge of the coast towards our new entertainment area down by the old port. But I mean, this is a destination in itself. We've got a little children's play park on the edge here, which has a little bit of that sand coming in. And I did go ahead and put in a little pier just so that we could see a little bit of activity through here, as that will act as a park. And then, yeah, I spent a lot of time putting some details on this beach. Got this cute little picnic and deck chairs just chilling that somebody must have just left that they've popped to the toilet. We got this little promenade, which is fairly basic in construction. It's just some hard-wearing concrete to face the elements of the sea. We got this little pergola to kind of act as a shade barrier for people walking through this area. And we do have that pedestrian surface kind of bringing people all the way through up to this boat ramp and what is now what I'm considering perhaps shop or a cafe. I'm not sure what they sell. They sell electronics. Fair enough. That's fine. They're probably one of those hip and trendy companies that are selling expensive gadgets that nobody really wants. And then at the front here, we've got the restaurant area next to the fish market. And the whole area has just come together really nicely. And I think it's time that we could start to upgrade some of these lots. Now, I do think over time this area will become more developed, especially as we're now seeing increased land value. However, I did notice that our unemployment has jumped up quite sharply from about 6% to 9.4%. And I think the main reason for that is in the end of the last episode, when I was balancing the budget, we cut quite a few services. So as a result, I think the civil services has been making some layoffs. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to reset these back to 100%. And that should start to bring in a few more people to fill in those open positions. The only problem is now, I think, if we go back to our budget, we might lean into the red. We're in the negative. And it does jump up and down, so it can be anywhere between negative 50,000, I've seen it negative 2 million. Now, what's driving that change? I'm not 100% sure. So the city has come up with a plan to raise money through parking fees. We'll turn on the parking fee here, and then we'll move all the way around to Mont Clementine and South Bay. Okay, so all the districts now have a parking fee policy. I just kept it at the original price of $10, which is equal to the amount that it costs at any of the regular plopped car parks. Now, if we go down to our money and see if that makes any difference. Okay, so we're coming up to about 5 o'clock in the evening, and it doesn't look like the budget is going to turn green anytime soon. But I do think we've got a slightly smaller deficit than what we had before. So perhaps the parking has made an improvement. A little bit of an experiment gone wrong maybe, but if anything, introducing the parking fees through here should discourage drivers from wanting to enter the main part of the city and hopefully use public transport a little bit more often. So it's not a completely wasted effort, I don't think. So all we have to do is go through our services again and make a few of those cuts, and hopefully we can balance the budget, and then we can start to rezone that waterfront. Okay, so with a few adjustments to our service budget and increasing the industrial tax, we're now in the green, and hopefully we stick in the green for the next 24 hours. Okay, I didn't go too heavy on zoning. I did rely a little bit more on plopping, and that's mostly because I didn't want to have to fiddle around with the lot sizes. I wanted to mostly use around about 2 to 3 tile wide buildings just to keep that small town feel, you know. When you've got larger lots, you just get larger buildings, and I wanted to keep this fairly small, especially since I'm imagining a lot of these buildings have been here for a long time when buildings were generally smaller anyway. And we've got a whole mix of different uses through here, whether it's residential, mixed use with commercial at the bottom, a little bit of office here and there, which is quite small, hopefully bringing in some new jobs, some new people, and just offering a little bit more variety to the street scene. I think this looks really nice. And we do have a couple of taller buildings down here, especially near this fish market, where perhaps these were old warehouses originally, and then developers have come in and they've responded to the housing crisis that we may have had at one time or another, and they've got these kind of very basic looking modular buildings through here. Not forgetting we've got a few stores at the bottom so that people do have the opportunity to pick up some groceries locally if they need to. And then at the back of these blocks, because generally speaking, when you put in smaller buildings, they don't go as far back. The depth is quite short. So we've added a few of these small buildings to fill in the gaps. So we've got this urban promenade section here, which is quite nice. Got these little independent boutique shops, which you can imagine could be off the beaten track. And through here, I think that was already there. We had the parking. I just added a few extra trees, and then a little bit of parking, and then one of these smaller row home buildings. And I think it looks really nice. You can see that the density slowly ramps up as you get close to the coast, which just adds a bit more texture and variety to the overall skyline, and I think it looks really nice. The last thing I'd like to do is just upgrade this road to have a few more trees along it. At the moment it's looking a little bit barren. We've got 2 tram stops, we've got one on this end and then we've got one at the other end as well. So let's put a couple of shelters down for people to stand under, and then I think this area should be good. Okay, I didn't go crazy on the street cleanup, but we have removed the majority of the parking along here. We do have a taxi stand on this side of the road, so we do need to retain that, and I'm not able to shorten the road as easily as I'd like to in the past with the double click trick. But through here I've added this semi-permeable green surface over the tram tracks, and then through here just a few trees along the footpath. Got these little shelters by the tram stops, and it looks really good. The whole area is looking pretty complete all the way down to the end of the harbour. And if we check out the tourism info view, we can check out the city attractiveness, and we can see how attractive our new recreational port area is. It's almost comparable to Mont Clementine in terms of how attractive it is. So hopefully that brings in many more tourists, visitors, and is a great place for people to visit. Having a quick look at land value, it's a bit more difficult to grasp since most of the city is of similar value. You can see that it was quite low in the industrial area, and it is starting to improve around here, especially near the beach and the dog park. And that wraps up today's episode as we take a final look at our reclaimed harbourfront. From the old port cranes standing tall in the distance to the dog park, beer garden, and that burst of colour across the shipping containers, it's starting to feel like somewhere people actually want to be and not just pass through. Of course, it's all meant to be temporary, but if you know Sunny Isle, you'll know that temporary tends to hang around. There's still plenty to do in this part of the city after all, especially as we make our way around the bay and start expanding the port. But for now, I'm really pleased with how this has come together. Let me know what you think, what you'd add, what you'd do differently, or whether you think the city should commit to keeping this space long term. Thanks as always for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time back here in Sunny Isle. Goodbye.